Single. Dad, Janitor, was told to stay quiet, but a CEO saw him sign to her deaf daughter and froze. Even the clocks don't dare to tick too loud here. That was the first thought Isla Lynn had as she stepped into the foyer of her own home. Marble floors, custom lighting a sculpture that cost more than her first year of college, all pristine, all perfect, all utterly quiet. Not the comforting silence of peace, but the brittle, glass-thin quiet of a house holding its breath. Somewhere upstairs a door clicked shut. Soft. Too soft for most to notice. But Isla noticed everything. She didn't call out. There was no use. Aurora wouldn't answer. The 6-year-old girl hadn't spoken a word in nearly 8 months. Not since that day. Isla walked slowly toward the grand staircase, heels clicking faintly, echoing in a space that felt more mausoleum than home. In her hand, a contract for a billion-dollar merger. In her chest, a hollow ache she couldn't spreadsheet her way out of. She passed the open living room where the nanny sat reading on her tablet, oblivious. On the far couch, Aurora sat with her knees drawn up, arms around a tattered plush bear, sketching on a small notepad with quiet fury. The bear's ear had long since been chewed through. The fur near its neck was worn smooth from endless worry. Isla paused. The drawings were the same as always. Tangled lines, strange symbols, spirals, hands with extra fingers. She'd once tried to decode them. Hired a child therapist. Consulted an art therapist, even brought in an AI-powered diagnostic tool. None of it mattered. Aurora didn't want to be understood. She wanted to vanish. The girl's eyes flicked up. A single heartbeat of recognition passed between them and then gone. She turned away, face tightening. Isla inhaled sharply, blinked once, and walked on, into her office. Closed the door. And that's when the sound came. It wasn't loud. It wasn't sharp. But in a house so still it might as well have been a fire alarm. A laugh. A child's laugh. Isla froze. Her pen slipped from her hand and clattered to the floor. No, not a laugh. A breath. A puff of something like joy. A hiccup of delight. And then silence again. She rushed out into the hall, but the nanny was still reading, oblivious. The hallway was still empty, and Aurora, still on the couch, was now hugging the bear tightly, cheeks flushed and not meeting her mother's eyes. Something had happened. Someone had been here. Hours later, Isla stood outside Aurora's school Hightower Academy, where the grass was trimmed with military precision and even the playgrounds had architectural symmetry. She watched from a distance behind a tinted window. Her driver stayed respectfully silent. And then she saw him, a janitor, broad shoulders beneath a faded navy uniform. He moved like someone trying not to be noticed, but couldn't help drawing attention. Not for his size, but his gentleness. The way he picked up a fallen pencil as if it were something precious. The way he slowed as he passed Aurora, who was sitting alone under a maple tree scribbling in her notepad. The man paused, looked, tilted his head, and then he moved his hands. It was a flicker, graceful, practiced, like music made of fingers. Aurora looked up, and for the first time in 8 months, she smiled. It was quick, fragile, gone in a blink, but Isla saw it, and it knocked the air out of her. The janitor turned and continued on, as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't just cracked open a sealed vault of silence. "Who is that?" Isla asked, voice tight. Her driver glanced. "Janitor, ma'am. Been here a few months. Keeps to himself. Name Calder Hayes, I believe." Isla didn't reply. She just stared at the retreating figure her reflection ghosted in the window beside her daughter's small, sudden smile. That night she sat at the foot of Aurora's bed. "I saw you today," Isla said softly, unsure if she was talking to her daughter or the ghost of the girl she used to know, at school, with the man. No response. "Was he talking to you?" A pause. "Was he signing?" Aurora's hand twitched beneath the blanket, a flicker of fingers, almost instinct. Isla held her breath, but then Aurora pulled the covers tighter around her face, turning away. Just like that, the moment passed. But Isla had seen it. She wasn't imagining things. Her daughter had smiled, and it hadn't been Isla who made it happen. The next morning, Isla didn't call her assistant, didn't review her speaking notes for the shareholders' meeting, didn't even open her laptop. She was standing in the staff break room of Hightower Academy holding 2 cups of coffee waiting. The janitor arrived at 6:04 a.m. Exactly on time. She stepped into his path like a chess move, controlled, deliberate. "Mr. Hayes." He stopped, surprised, then gave a polite nod. "I'm Aurora's mother," she said. "I'd like to talk." He looked down at the coffee, then at her. He didn't take the cup. "Please," Isla added softer now. She smiled yesterday. I haven't seen her smile in 8 months. A flicker of something behind his eyes. Pain, pity, memory. Still, he didn't speak. "Did you teach her that? The signs?" He finally answered, his voice rough like unpolished stone. She already knew. She just forgot she was allowed to use it. Isla blinked. That wasn't the answer she expected. "I used to teach," he added quietly. "Before." "Before what?" His eyes held hers. Then he simply said, "Life," and turned back to his mop. But Isla wasn't ready to let go. She set the coffee down on the edge of a nearby table. "Thank you, Mr. Hayes," she said, "for reminding my daughter that silence doesn't mean she's broken." Calder paused, just for a moment, then nodded once and walked away. Behind him, Isla stood still, fingers wrapped around a now cold coffee cup, eyes wide with the dawning sense that something inside her had shifted. And it wasn't just the silence, it was the first echo of hope she'd felt in a very long time. If you want to keep a secret, mop with your head down, but speak with your hands. Calder Hayes never meant to be seen. Not really. That was the unspoken agreement between him and the world. He would sweep around its edges, and it would forget he was ever there. So when he felt eyes watching him from the second-floor window that afternoon, he almost didn't look up. Almost. But something made him glance toward the glass, and sure enough, Isla Lynn stood there, arms crossed, eyes like spotlights through the pane. She wasn't blinking. He turned back to his mop. The hallway was empty, polished to a soft gleam. School had ended an hour ago, and most of the students were long gone except for one. Aurora. She sat alone on a bench in the back courtyard, her sketchpad resting on her knees. Her legs dangled not quite touching the ground, and her hands were dancing again. Not randomly, not nervously. Signing. Tiny motions just at the edge of memory, like a language half remembered in a dream. Calder froze in place, then slowly wiped his hands on his uniform and stepped outside. He approached carefully like you might approach a wounded bird. Soft footsteps, no sudden moves. She didn't notice him at first. Then she did, and for a moment they simply looked at each other. Then Calder knelt, not in front of her, not directly, but at a respectful angle, not to tower over her or take up too much space. He signed slowly, "Hi." Aurora blinked. "Do you want me to go?" She hesitated. Then slowly her hand moved. "No." Calder smiled, just barely. "'Kay." Then he sat beside her on the edge of the bench, silent, letting the moment breathe. Aurora returned to her sketchpad, but now she wasn't scribbling. She was tracing her fingers through the air as she drew, signing in shapes, drawing in signs. Calder watched quietly, hands resting in his lap. After a while, he pointed at one of her drawings. "Is that your bear?" he signed. She nodded. Then, without warning, she signed something rapid. Calder had to pause. "Say it again slower," she repeated. "He has a secret name. What is it?" She smiled, a real shy smile, and shook her head. "It's only for people who listen." High above the courtyard, behind tinted glass, Principal Veronica Sharp was watching. Her jaw tightened. She didn't like what she saw, and she especially didn't like that the girl who hadn't interacted with anyone in nearly a year was now signing fluently to a janitor. A janitor. She marched down the stairs, her heels clacking with calculated force, and exited through the back doors like a general approaching the battlefield. "Mr. Hayes," she said curtly. He looked up. Aurora immediately shrank back, clutching her sketchpad like a shield. Principal Sharp's smile was thin and tight. "Could I have a word?" Calder rose, slowly nodded once to Aurora. "It's okay then," followed the principal a few feet away. Her voice dropped but not low enough. "Your duties are sanitation, not student engagement, not emotional support, not whatever this is." Calder didn't answer. He didn't flinch. Principal Sharp stepped closer, her words sharper than her perfume. "Some lines aren't meant to be crossed, especially by someone without credentials." He still didn't speak. That was what unnerved her most. Finally, he said, "If she had spoken, would you have told the teacher to stop listening?" She blinked. Then her voice hardened. "You're not here to teach. Stay in your lane." Calder gave a small nod, the kind that meant "I hear you, but not necessarily that I agree." And then he walked away, back toward the courtyard, back toward the girl. But Aurora was gone. Only the sketch pad remained on the bench left behind like a tiny flag of surrender. That evening, the doorbell at Calder's small apartment rang. He wasn't expecting anyone. He opened the door to find Isla Lynn standing alone, holding the sketch pad in her hand. She didn't wait for an invitation. She stepped inside like someone stepping into a storm they knew would change them. "I saw what you did," she said quietly, "with Aurora." Calder didn't reply. "I haven't seen her respond to anyone in months, not her therapists, not her grandmother, not even me. Still nothing. So what changed?" She asked, her voice sharper now. "What did you do?" Calder took the sketch pad gently from her hands, flipped to a page. Then he pointed to a single drawing, two hands reaching toward each other, fingers open, not quite touching. He signed, "I listened." Isla stared at him, then looked away, lips pressed thin. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "She needs something I can't give. And now she's connecting with a man whose job title is mop and bucket." He raised an eyebrow, gently amused. "Sorry," she muttered. "That came out worse than I meant." "No offense taken," Calder said. "That's exactly what it says on the ID badge." But his voice was calm, centered, and somehow it disarmed her more than if he'd lashed out. "I just want to understand," she said, almost pleading now. "How do you know what she needs?" Calder was silent for a long beat. Then, because once someone looked at me like I was broken, and I believed them, until someone else, just one person, didn't. She said nothing, but her eyes, for the first time in a long while, softened. "What did you do before this?" she asked. His jaw tightened. "I used to teach. ASL. Why did you stop?" He met her gaze, and in that moment she understood he wasn't ready to share that part of his story yet. So she didn't press. She just stood there in the quiet between two strangers who were no longer strangers. Then Isla did something she hadn't done in years. She signed. Clumsy, slow, but sincere. "Thank you." Calder's eyes widened just slightly, and then without missing a beat he signed back, "You're welcome. She's worth it." Isla. Lynn had never believed in accidents. You didn't build a multi-million-dollar logistics empire by stumbling into luck. You built it by watching everything, every metric, every movement, every mistake. That's how you stayed ahead, how you stayed safe. But that afternoon, standing behind the tinted glass of her town car watching her daughter smile, actually smile at a janitor with calloused hands and quiet eyes, Isla felt something fracture deep in her armor. It hadn't been a fluke. She'd watched Aurora's fingers move like leaves in wind, tentative but graceful. Watched that man, Calder Hayes, respond not with pity, but fluency, precision, patience, like he'd known her language longer than he'd known his own name. Isla sat frozen in the back seat long after the driver asked, "Home, ma'am?" "No," she said finally. "Take me back." The next day, she returned to Hightower Academy, unannounced. She didn't head to the principal's office or the boardroom where her donations had bought half a wing. She walked the long way around heels, quiet on polished stone, until she reached the courtyard behind the art wing. There they were again, Aurora, Calder. The sketch pad lay between them. Aurora was signing a story as she drew it. Calder listened with his eyes nodding, occasionally signing responses like dialogue. There were no words, just understanding. It was unbearable and beautiful. Hila felt like an intruder, not just in their space but in her own daughter's world. She had never been able to reach Aurora like this. Therapists had tried, specialists flown in from across the country, but not one of them had made her laugh like this. Not one had earned her trust. But this man, this janitor had, and Isla didn't know whether to feel gratitude or shame. Later that evening, Calder heard the soft knock on the maintenance break room door. He wasn't expecting visitors, especially not in his windowless sanctuary with a humming vending machine and walls lined with industrial shelves. Isla stepped in like she owned the air but didn't know what to do with it. "I wanted to talk," she said. He put down his cup of instant coffee. "About my daughter," she said, "and you." He gestured to the folding chair across from him. "Not exactly the Ritz. I've held board meetings in shipping containers," she said flatly. "I'm not here for ambiance." They sat in silence for a beat. Calder didn't offer pleasantries. Isla didn't ask for them. "She's different with you," she said. Calder nodded once. "She smiles. Signs. Follows you like you've got gravity." He didn't respond. "I need to understand why," Isla said softer now. "I've tried everything. I've read every book. I hired a child psychologist who charges more per hour than most people make in a week." She stared at him, voice tightening. "But she looks at you like you're the only person who's ever heard her." Calder's reply came slow, deliberate. Maybe she was tired of being studied. Maybe she just needed to be seen. Isla exhaled like someone who'd just been told the truth they were avoiding. Calder added, "Kids don't care about credentials. They care about presence." That hit harder than any spreadsheet ever had. "I wasn't always this," she said, waving vaguely at herself. "I used to read her bedtime stories. I used to braid her hair." She swallowed. "I blinked, and I became someone who leaves the house before she wakes up." Calder looked at her, not judging, just listening. It disarmed her more than any defense would have. "She doesn't need a hero," he said gently. "She needs a witness." The next day, Isla came early. She stood in the hallway near the music room, watching from a distance as Calder and Aurora sat cross-legged on the floor stacking paper cups into towers. "Tell me what that teaches her," Principal Sharp said coldly, appearing beside Isla like a shadow with a clipboard. "Balance," Isla replied without turning. "Pattern recognition. Trust." "She doesn't belong in janitor closets," the principal snapped. "She belongs in classrooms." Isla's gaze cut sideways like a blade. "She's learning more in that closet than she has in most of your classrooms." Sharp's mouth opened. Closed. Isla stepped forward. "I want him to keep working with her. That's not in his job description. Then change it. You're overstepping. I fund this school. I built half this wing. So yes, I will absolutely step where I please." The principal backed away, but Calder had heard it all. He didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge the conversation, just stayed beside Aurora, helping her balance a tiny red cup on top of a leaning stack. That night, Isla sat at the kitchen table watching Aurora color in silence. "Did you have fun today?" she asked, trying to keep her voice casual. Aurora nodded. "Did Mr. Hayes teach you anything new?" Aurora paused, then signed carefully. "He taught me how to say, 'I feel safe.'" Isla's throat caught. She reached for her daughter's hand, held it gently. "Will you teach me?" she asked. Aurora hesitated, then nodded. They practiced together, fumbling at first, laughing softly, and for the first time in months. They weren't mother and daughter navigating grief. They were just two people learning how to speak each other's language again. Later, when Isla opened her laptop to resume her emails, she paused. She searched American Sign Language night classes near me, then clicked register. Because healing didn't happen all at once. It happened in moments, like paper cups stacked patiently by hands that understood the weight of silence. And in that silence, something finally began to speak. You don't just disappear from the world unless the world gives you a reason. That's what Calder Hayes used to believe. until he did exactly that. It had been years since he'd heard his full name spoken with any warmth. Most people at Hightower just called him Hayes or Custodian, or didn't address him at all. That was fine. He liked it that way. Safe, unseen. But something had shifted since the little girl with the storm-silent eyes signed to him in chalk-dusted fingers, and since her mother, Isla Lynn, sat across from him in a janitor's closet and asked not what he did, but who he was. It had been a long time since anyone asked, even longer since he answered. Years ago, Calder had stood in front of classrooms filled with students eager to learn ASL. His hands danced through the air with passion precision. He wasn't just teaching a language, he was building bridges. Every sign was a step toward understanding, toward dignity for those who had been silenced by the world. He had a wife then, Olivia, and a son, a quiet boy with a giggle like bells and a hunger to mimic every gesture his father made. They used to sign jokes across the dinner table, hands flickering like fireflies, until the accident. Until the night a distracted driver ran a red light and took Olivia's life in one shattering heartbeat. Calder hadn't even been in the car, but he remembered the sound of sirens, the smell of gasoline, the look on his son's face when he realized Mom wasn't coming home. Grief is a funny thing. It doesn't break you all at once. It just erases pieces until you're hollow. Calder withdrew from the classroom, from his son, from everything that reminded him of what he used to be. He lost custody. He lost his purpose. He took a job nobody wanted. A broom. A name tag. Silence. It was punishment, perhaps, or maybe penance. Either way, he deserved it, until now. Aurora had reopened a door he thought was sealed forever. She didn't just mimic the signs, she felt them. Each movement was deliberate, gentle, as if shaping the air around her gave her power she hadn't held in years. With her, Calder wasn't just a janitor. He was someone, and for the first time in a long time. He wondered if it was time to step out of the shadows. One afternoon, Isla found him sitting on a bench near the back of the school grounds, a small paper journal in hand. "You write?" she asked. He looked up, surprised. "Old habit. What do you write about things?" "I wish I'd said." She sat beside him, careful not to crowd him. "I've got a whole closet full of unsentences," she murmured. "Mostly to my daughter and to myself." They sat in silence for a beat. Then Calder said, "My son lives 3 states away now, with his grandparents. You don't see him." "I used to," he said quietly. "Then one day I stopped trying. Thought I was doing him a favor." She turned to him, voice barely above a whisper. "You think disappearing from someone's life is a favor?" Calder didn't answer, because that was the question that haunted him most. Later that week, Aurora tugged on his sleeve during one of their lessons. "Do you have kids?" she signed. He hesitated, then signed back, "Yes, a son. Where is he?" Calder paused, then far away. "I made mistakes." Aurora looked at him for a long time, then slowly reached out and signed, "But you're kind now." He blinked. That simple gesture, 6 small signs, cracked something open in him. He hadn't cried in front of anyone since the funeral. But now, in a sunlit corner of a school hallway with a child who spoke with her hands and saw with her heart, he did. Meanwhile, Isla found herself changing in ways she didn't recognize but didn't resist. Her meetings ran shorter. Her dinners with Aurora ran longer. She noticed things she hadn't before, like how her daughter's laughter came more easily now, how her drawings had more color, how she stopped needing the bear to feel safe, and how Calder Hayes, the man she once passed in silence, had become someone whose absence she noticed more than most people's presence. She asked him one day as they cleaned up after an impromptu drawing session with Aurora, "Why don't you go back to teaching?" He didn't look up from the crayons. "Not sure anyone's asking." "I am." That made him pause. She added, "You were born to do this." He looked at her, then not like a janitor looking at a CEO, but like a man seeing a woman who believed in him. "I was also born to be a father," he said. "Didn't mean I did it right." Her voice softened. "Maybe you get to be both. Maybe it's not too late." Calder held her gaze for a moment longer, then nodded. Not in agreement, but in hope. That night, he pulled an old box from the back of his closet. Inside was a photograph him, Olivia, and their son at a park. Frozen laughter, wind-blown hair, his boy's hands mid-sign. He ran a finger over the image, then reached for a pen, and wrote 3 words on a new page of his journal. Find the boy. Because maybe the past couldn't be undone, but the future that was still unwritten, and Calder Hayes was finally ready to speak again. Sometimes the quietest rooms hold the loudest truths. Calder stared at the invitation as if it were a warning label. It wasn't printed or formal, just a folded piece of white paper tucked into his locker written in Isla's unmistakably elegant handwriting. Dinner tonight, just us. 7 p.m. My place. Bring an appetite. I. He hadn't received a dinner invitation in years. He read it again, then a third time. He hadn't brought an appetite in years either. That evening, he stood outside her sleek modern house with hands that didn't know where to go. He wasn't holding his mop or toolbox. No keys jingled from his belt. He wore the only collared shirt he owned, the one he hadn't touched since the court hearing. The door opened before he knocked. Isla stood there barefoot, no blazer, no boardroom. Just a soft navy sweater, sleeves rolled to her elbows, and a warmth in her eyes that didn't belong to the CEO he first met. Calder cleared his throat. "You sure this isn't a mistake?" She smiled. "I don't do mistakes with handwritten invitations." He stepped inside. The house was quiet, but not cold. Candles flickered low on the kitchen island. A jazz record played gently in the background, almost shyly. A pan simmered on the stove, sending out a buttery scent that reminded Calder of a time long ago when a woman hummed in his kitchen and a little boy banged wooden spoons against pots. He stood stiffly. Isla glanced at him over her shoulder. "You can sit, you know. The chairs are just furniture. They don't bite." Calder took a slow step forward and eased into a seat at the counter. "I'm not good at this," he said. "At eating, at being invited to things." Isla plated the food, simple roasted chicken and vegetables, but elegant in the way only someone like her could make it look. She poured water into glasses and sat across from him. "Well," she said softly, "it's just dinner, not a trial." He gave a small smile. "Depends who's at the table." They ate in near silence at first, but not an awkward one. The kind of silence that stretches like a blanket between two people who've both been cold for too long. Eventually, Isla broke it. "You know, Aurora used to cry every night after school, even before the accident. She never told me why." Calder looked up, listening. "I was too busy building empires," Isla continued. "I kept thinking if I worked hard enough, earned enough, controlled enough, I could protect her." She set down her fork. "But control doesn't heal, and power can't love for you." Calder spoke carefully. "Sometimes, silence says what words can't." She looked at him. "You understand her. I listen differently." "You listen deeply," she corrected. They sat with that truth for a while. Later, Isla poured them tea. They sipped in the warm hush of the kitchen, and Calder noticed a painting on the wall, a watercolor of hands in motion. He recognized the signs instantly. "Safe Hope Family." "Did you paint that?" he asked. "No, Aurora did. Weeks ago, before she even started speaking with you." Calder looked at her, startled. Isla nodded. "She's always known how to speak. She just didn't think anyone would listen." That made something ache in his chest. "I should have done more," Isla added quietly. "You're doing it now." She looked at him, really looked at him. "You make me question everything I thought I knew," she said. "You sweep floors, but you see deeper than half the therapists I've hired." Calder's voice was soft. "Sometimes people with nothing left see the most." Isla leaned on the counter, her expression shifting. "I keep thinking," she said, "if I hadn't seen you sign to her that day, if I hadn't been watching, I might have missed the most important connection of her life." Calder said nothing. He just sipped his tea, then finally met her eyes. "You didn't miss it," he said. "You were just finally ready to see it." She smiled, touched. "You say so little, Calder, but every word feels like a stone dropped into still water." He looked down at his hands. "I used to talk a lot," he said, "back when I thought people needed noise to feel something. And now I think maybe stillness is where the truth hides." They moved to the living room. A fire crackled low. Aurora was already asleep upstairs, and the house settled into that kind of nighttime rhythm that made everything feel sacred. Calder picked up a photo from a side table. Isla and Aurora, younger, both laughing in a garden. His fingers traced the edges. "I miss that smile," Isla whispered. "She still has it. She just needs reasons again." She sat beside him. Not too close, just enough that their shoulders almost touched. "I used to be afraid of silence," she admitted. "Thought it meant loneliness, emptiness. And now," she turned her face toward him, voice barely a breath. "Now I think maybe it's a space waiting to be filled with the right presence." He didn't answer. Instead, slowly, deliberately, Calder raised his hands and signed, "You're not alone." Isla watched every movement, her eyes glistening. Then, slowly, unsure, she raised her hands and repeated it, clumsy but clear. "You're not alone." It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And, for the first time, Calder let himself imagine. Not just a moment, but a future. As he left that night, Isla walked him to the door. Neither of them spoke. She didn't hug him, he didn't offer. But just before he stepped outside, she reached out and touched his wrist light brief. A gesture that said, "You're seen." And Calder, for the first time in years, felt like a man who wasn't just passing through life unnoticed. He walked into the night air with a heart heavier than before, but somehow full. Behind him in the quiet house, a mother stood by the door, not waiting for an answer, but hoping for a return. Some people wield silence like a balm, others like a blade. The email came at 6:43 a.m. Subject line, Aurora. Lynn, Gala Participation. Isla read it 3 times before the meaning settled in like frost creeping across glass. If Aurora did not deliver a verbal expression of gratitude during the annual Hightower Gala, her scholarship would be reviewed. Reviewed, a polished word for revoked. She forwarded the email to her assistant, slammed her laptop shut, and stood frozen in her marble kitchen fingers, white around the coffee mug. Upstairs, she heard Aurora humming softly a melody Calder had taught her by tapping rhythm on the dining table. Her daughter was healing, slowly, gently, and someone wanted to measure that healing with a microphone. Isla stormed into the Hightower main office by 8:01. Veronica Hale, the headmistress, was already seated behind her oak desk, a thin smile preloaded on her lips. "Isla," she purred, "I trust you've read the memo." "I have," Isla said evenly, "and I want to be absolutely clear. You're threatening my daughter's scholarship because she might not speak at a gala." "We're not threatening anything," Veronica replied, folding her manicured hands. "We're encouraging full participation. Aurora has had more than ample time to acclimate. A short message of thanks is customary. It reflects progress. Inclusion. Inclusion." Isla repeated, her voice like cracked ice. "She's deaf, not defective. She's communicating every day, with art, with sign, with soul." "Yes, well," Veronica said, adjusting her silk scarf. "Not all donors are quite so interpretive." "You want her to perform?" Isla snapped. "You want her to prove she belongs on your terms." Veronica's smile turned tight. "We have an image to uphold, and my daughter is not your image project. Then perhaps she'd be better suited at another school, one more flexible with standards." Isla stood slowly. Her heels didn't clack. They struck. "You're going to regret that sentence," she said, and walked out without another word. That afternoon, Calder found Isla waiting for him outside the maintenance closet. She didn't say hello, she just handed him her phone screen unlocked. He read the email, then looked up. Her eyes were burning, but her voice was glass smooth. "They're giving us 2 weeks. 2 weeks to turn a 6-year-old into a puppet." He nodded slowly, folding the phone back into her palm. "I'm not asking her to speak," Isla added, "but I need her to be heard." Calder thought for a moment, then signed a single word. Perform. She blinked. You think she could? He signed again. No, I know she will. They began that same evening in the small music room at the back of the school. Aurora sat on a beanbag, skeptical arms crossed. Calder sat cross-legged in front of her, silent. He didn't push, didn't ask. He simply signed a word story, then waited. After a few minutes, Aurora raised one hand and replied, Owl. Calder nodded. Then another sign, tree, and another, wind. Soon they were building something together, an invisible poem strung from their hands and breath and glances. Aurora smiled for the first time in days. Calder turned to Isla, who'd been watching from the doorway. He signed, We'll build her a stage. Not to speak louder, but to be seen. Each afternoon they returned. Calder taught Aurora how to speak with her bones, not just her fingers, how to pause like punctuation, how to breathe through silence, how to let the meaning fall, not shout. They choreographed a poem of light, shadow, and motion. It didn't need words. It needed presence. One night, Isla joined them. She fumbled through signs, laughing at her own stiffness. Calder gently corrected her posture, guiding her wrists. Aurora giggled and took over coaching. For once, they were just a family. Days before the gala, Isla asked Calder quietly, Are we doing the right thing, not forcing her to speak? He answered by tracing one sign into her palm, slow and deliberate. Truth. She closed her hand around it like a fragile gift. But not everyone was thrilled. That same week, Veronica intercepted Calder in the hallway. You're overstepping, she said flatly. Calder paused. You were hired to clean the building, not mold it. He said nothing. You've blurred the lines, she added. Parents are starting to talk. He finally met her gaze and signed a single word. Good, she flushed. You know this isn't how things are done. He signed again. Maybe it should be, and walked away, back straight, mop in hand. One evening, as Calder locked up the supply room, Isla met him in the hallway. She didn't speak, just looked at him for a long moment before reaching for his wrist. She turned it gently, revealing the small faded tattoo on his inner forearm. ASL saved my son. She traced the words silently. Calder whispered, He stopped talking after my wife passed. I taught him to sign. It was the only way I could stay connected to him. Where is he now? Isla asked softly. With his grandparents, Calder said. The court thought I needed to heal first. And did you? I thought I had, until I met your daughter. They stood in the hush of the hallway. And then Isla did something neither expected. She raised her hand slowly, carefully, and signed, Thank you. Calder didn't smile. He bowed his head humbly, as if that was the only language he truly trusted. The night of the gala was approaching, and Aurora was ready. But what no one yet knew was that the performance would change more than just a girl's life. It would awaken a room, a city, a system, and it would begin with silence. The kind that roared. Some voices don't echo, they bloom. The rehearsal room was small. No more than a converted storage space tucked between the music wing and a stairwell that rarely saw footsteps. But inside it felt like a chapel, quiet, sacred, full of light. Aurora stood in front of the cracked mirror, her hands trembling slightly. Calder crouched beside her, holding a marker and a pad. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He simply wrote, You don't need to be loud. You just need to be real. Aurora looked at him, then slowly nodded. From the hallway, Isla watched in silence. In her tailored blazer and pointed heels, she looked like a woman who belonged to a different world, one of deadlines and boardrooms. But in that moment, she was simply Mom. For the first time in years, she wasn't checking her phone. She wasn't leading. She was learning. Calder and Aurora met every afternoon. No PowerPoint, no flashcards, only stories. He'd teach her how to tell a poem with her fingers, one sign at a time. Not just the mechanics, but the emotion behind each movement. Don't show them words he wrote one day. Show them your heart. She replied, fingers fluttering with increasing confidence. like this. And when she signed it looked like she was painting in the air. Late one evening, Isla joined them again. Calder handed her a notebook. "I'm just here to watch," she said. Hesitant, he wrote back, "Then you'll never understand." Isla blinked. Aurora giggled, then patted the carpet beside her. So Isla sat. For the next 30 minutes she stumbled through the alphabet, her fingers tangled, her wrists stiff. She signed love upside down and home backwards, but she laughed, and Aurora laughed harder. Calder only smiled. That night, when they stepped into the parking lot, the sky above was velvet dark, speckled with stars. A flickering street lamp cast long shadows across the sidewalk. Then Calder pointed upward. He signed slowly to both of them. "The stars don't shout, but we still see them." Isla turned to him, something fragile blooming behind her eyes. "I'm sorry," she said. "For every time I thought words were the only way to be heard." He didn't answer. He just raised his hand and signed, "You're listening now." A week before the gala, the three of them stood in the center of the old rehearsal room. No chairs, no props, just space. Calder looked at Aurora, then at Isla. Then he reached out and traced a series of signs in midair. Slowly, delicately. Aurora mirrored them. So did Isla a beat behind. Together they painted something invisible, like a family building a home no one else could see. That moment wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't in any script. But Isla felt something shift inside her, like a lock turning. She realized Aurora didn't need to be fixed. She needed to be felt. And Calder, this quiet man with tired eyes and a mop bucket, had seen her daughter more clearly than anyone with a PhD or a clipboard ever had. On the morning of the final rehearsal, Aurora arrived with a folded paper in her pocket. She handed it to Calder. It was a poem handwritten in crayon, crooked and bright. He read it once, then again. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers. He nodded, eyes soft. "We'll turn this," he signed, "into music you can feel." That night, Isla found Calder sitting alone outside the school building. He was fixing the handle on a water fountain, but his mind was somewhere else. "I didn't get a chance to ask," she said, taking a seat beside him. "What happened to your son?" Calder looked up surprised. Then, slowly, he pulled a worn photo from his pocket. A boy, maybe 9, holding up a sign that said, "My dad is my hero. He's in Oregon now," Calder said quietly. "Lives with his grandparents. Do you talk?" "We write letters. I send him sign language puzzles. He sends me drawings." Isla hesitated. "Do you think you'll ever—" "I hope so." She didn't push further. Instead, she reached out and placed her hand gently over his. No romance, just connection. Then without a word, she signed, "He'd be proud of you." Calder looked away, but not before she saw it, just the edge of a tear. He blinked away. The night before the gala, Aurora couldn't sleep. She paced in her room, teddy bear clutched tight. Her fingers twitched with nervous energy, so Isla climbed into bed beside her. Together, under the glow of a nightlight, they signed through the entire poem again and again. At the end, Aurora looked at her mother and whispered, not with her voice, but with her eyes. "Will they see me?" Isla nodded. "No," she signed back. "They'll feel you, back at home." Calder stayed up late. He didn't watch TV, didn't read. He just sat by the window, hands folded, staring at the moon. A prayer with no words. A hope with no sound. Tomorrow, a child would speak with fingers, and the world would have to listen. Some stages are meant for sound, others for silence that changes everything. The gymnasium had never looked like this. Twinkling lights draped from the rafters like stars caught mid-fall. The folding chairs were lined with military precision. Parents in tailored suits and stiff dresses sat shoulder to shoulder murmuring over programs with names printed in gold. A red velvet curtain framed the makeshift stage, and behind it, barely taller than the mic stand, stood Aurora. No hearing aids, no cue cards, no words. Just a 6-year-old girl with trembling hands and the weight of 100 eyes on her. Isla stood off to the side, frozen in place. Her manicured fingers curled around the program. The paper crinkled. Her breath caught. Backstage, Calder stood half in shadow. Not as a janitor tonight, not even as a teacher, just as a man who believed in the power of what could not be said. He signed once to Aurora 3 simple shapes in the air. "I'm here." She nodded once, and walked to center stage. The chatter in the room died slowly like someone turning down the volume on a storm. A single spotlight flickered to life. Aurora stood in its center, alone. The mic before her remained untouched. Instead, she lifted her hands and began to sign. It wasn't flashy. There were no dramatic gestures or sweeping arms, but what she signed felt clearer than any microphone ever could. A poem. "I used to be quiet, like a window with curtains shut tight. Now I open, and I shine." The signs flowed like water, graceful and sure. Every syllable carved in air. Every pause purposeful. Gasps rippled through the audience, not of confusion, but of awe. Even those who didn't know ASL understood. This wasn't a performance. It was a revelation. From the front row, a parent who'd once whispered cruel doubts about kids like her quietly wiped tears with the edge of her silk scarf. A teacher who'd ignored Aurora's silence now pressed a hand to his heart. A boy who had teased her once ducked his head. But the most powerful reaction came from Isla. She stood there, hands trembling as her daughter turned the air into art. She wasn't speaking, but she was heard. Backstage, Calder signed along his fingers, following her pace like a conductor guiding a silent symphony. A camera operator caught the image, the janitor in shadows signing in sync with a girl on stage. 2 hands, 1 voice. And that image would become iconic. When Aurora finished, she stood still for a moment. Silence. Then came the first clap, soft, from Isla, then another, and another, until the room was thunder. Not the polite applause of obligation, but something raw, something real, like the whole room had just witnessed something sacred and they had to respond. Aurora didn't bow. She simply smiled, a small, unsure smile, then turned and walked off stage, her teddy bear clutched tight under her arm. In the wings, Calder knelt. Aurora ran straight to him. No words, just arms thrown around his neck. She held on tight and signed against his shoulder. "I did it." He pulled back just enough to sign back, "No, we did." Outside the gymnasium, under the golden wash of street lamps and autumn leaves, parents and children spilled onto the sidewalk. But Calder didn't leave immediately. He stayed behind, sweeping the edges of the hall, quietly returning to his role, the man with the mop and the quiet eyes. Until Isla found him by the supply closet. He looked up. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there. Then she stepped forward and signed, hands trembling slightly. "You changed her life." He shook his head gently, then signed, "She changed mine." A beat of silence. Then Isla took his hand, turned it over and slowly spelled each letter in his palm, H-O-M-E. His eyes flickered, then softened. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel like a man who'd lost everything. He felt like a man becoming something again. That night, social media lit up. Someone had uploaded the video of Aurora's performance, complete with subtitles and the shadowed image of Calder signing behind the curtain. Within hours, it had over 1 million views. By morning, it would be 5. People commented from around the world, "I don't know sign language." But I felt every word. This janitor just taught us more about humanity than 100 TED Talks. This little girl just made silence louder than applause. But Calder didn't know about any of that yet. He was in the school hallway rinsing paint trays from a student art project. Just as always, except tonight for the first time. He didn't feel invisible. He felt seen. Not every miracle is welcomed, especially when it comes from a janitor. It only took 48 hours for the applause to turn into whispers, and for the whispers to become complaints. By Monday morning, the video of Aurora's silent performance had gone viral, 5.6 million views and counting. News anchors called her the girl who spoke without a voice. Influencers stitched the moment where Calder's hands moved in sync behind the curtain, calling it the most human thing I've ever seen. But inside, Hightower Elementary tension crackled like a frayed wire in a flooded basement. The staff lounge was thick with unspoken judgment. Mrs. Kendrick, the third-grade teacher, sipped her coffee with more noise than usual. "So, we're letting janitors run the stage now," she said, loud enough to be heard across the room. No one replied. She smirked. "I suppose next week the crossing guard will teach Shakespeare." By the end of second period, Calder was summoned. The email was cold. 2 lines. Subject: immediate meeting required, location principal's office, 10:00 a.m. He arrived 5 minutes early. Knocked once. Waited. The door opened with a snap. Principal Veronica Lang stood tall behind her desk, arms crossed, pearls resting like armor across her chest. Calder stepped inside. Silent. She didn't invite him to sit. "I gave you one rule," she said, voice clipped. "Stay in your lane." He met her gaze but said nothing. She slid a manila folder across the desk. Inside were stills from the gala video. One showed Calder backstage. Another captured the standing ovation. "You turned a school function into your personal crusade." He finally spoke. Calm. Even. She needed someone to listen. Veronica's eyes narrowed. She needed structure, rules, boundaries. You blurred every one of them. Parents are calling, staff are angry. "Do you have any idea what this looks like?" He held her stare. "Yes." She leaned forward. "Then you understand why I have to terminate your contract." He didn't argue. Didn't beg. Just nodded once like he'd been expecting this moment the whole time. He stood to leave, but paused at the door. Then, with the quiet power of a man who'd learned to speak without shouting, he turned back. "I wasn't trying to be seen," he said. "I was trying to help a little girl find her voice." Word spread fast. By lunchtime, students whispered in hallways. Some teachers clapped when he passed. Others looked away. Aurora didn't understand at first, but when she arrived at school and didn't see Calder by the gate, didn't get her usual wave or see his quiet smile, she knew something was wrong. She asked Isla with her hands frantic and uncertain. "Where is he? Did I do something wrong?" Isla couldn't answer. Her throat clenched too tightly. But she made a decision, right then. She wasn't just a CEO. She was a mother, and she would not let silence win this time. That night, Isla called a press conference. Not from a sleek boardroom, not behind a marble podium, but in front of Hightower Elementary. She stood beside the same stage where Aurora had performed, wearing no makeup, no designer jacket, just a sweatshirt and jeans. Cameras clicked. Reporters leaned in, and she spoke. "My daughter couldn't speak for months. Not to me, not to anyone." She was locked in a silence so deep I thought I'd lost her forever. She held up her phone, playing the now viral video of Aurora and Calder. This man didn't give a speech. He didn't make a lesson plan. He just listened. He reached her when none of us could, a pause, and for that he was punished. Gasps rippled through the small crowd. "I am the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. I know what leadership looks like. It doesn't always come with a corner office or a nameplate. Sometimes it comes with a mop." The video of her speech exploded online. Within hours, hashtags trended, #hands that speak, reinstate, Calder, let him teach. News networks picked it up. One anchor said, "What kind of system punishes a janitor for giving a child her voice back?" By Friday, the school board called an emergency session. Inside the conference room, Principal Veronica sat rigid in her chair, surrounded by board members and legal advisors. One by one, parents stood to speak. She changed because of him. He didn't teach her math. He taught her hope. He didn't break rules. He broke walls. At the end of the meeting, the board chair leaned forward and looked at Veronica squarely. "We're not asking you," she said. "We're telling you. You've lost the room." The decision was unanimous, effective immediately. Veronica Lang was removed from her position. Outside, Calder stood quietly under a tree. He wasn't holding a sign, wasn't waiting for applause. He just wanted to make sure Aurora was okay. That's when Isla found him. She didn't speak, just stood beside him. After a long moment, she turned and said softly, "You know, I built empires with my voice, but you rebuilt my daughter's world without ever raising yours." He said nothing, but looked at her like he heard everything. Then she reached out, took his hand, and slowly signed, "Stay." Sometimes the right person shows up when the world stops clapping. It was quiet in the school courtyard after the storm. No reporters, no signs, no shouting, just wind stirring the late autumn leaves and a gentle dusk falling over the brick walls of Hightower Elementary. Calder stood by the bench near the playground watching Aurora chase bubbles. The sun had caught her hair, turning it to gold. She twirled in silence barefoot in the grass, laughing without sound until she saw him watching. She grinned, then signed something with both hands fast and joyful. "I missed you." Calder smiled, then signed back with perfect clarity. "Me too." A soft voice broke the moment. "She talks about you like you're a wizard," Isla said, stepping out from behind the tree. "The man who speaks with lightning in his hands." Calder turned. He hadn't heard her approach. Isla wore no heels this time, no designer coat, just a soft navy sweater and jeans, her hair pulled back, eyes full of something halfway between gratitude and something else she hadn't named yet. "You're not just her safe place," she added. "You're her compass." He nodded slowly. "She's a remarkable kid." Isla stepped closer. "Calder, I want to talk to you about what's next. For you, for her, for all of us." He tilted his head. "You've spent your life cleaning up after people who never saw you. I think it's time you were seen." She pulled out a folded piece of paper, a contract, crisp, cream-colored with her company's letterhead. He looked down at it but didn't touch it. "I want you to come work with us," she said, "at Lindbridge Foundation. We sponsor inclusion programs across the country. I want you to lead one." Calder blinked. "Lead full salary, full benefits, your daughter's school tuition covered, and every resource we have. Because what you gave my daughter isn't something I can buy, but I can honor it." He hesitated. "I'm a janitor, Isla." She stepped closer. "No, Calder, you were a janitor. You're a teacher, a leader, a healer. You just used the tools life gave you until someone handed you new ones." They sat on the bench as the sky turned to indigo. Aurora curled up beside Calder, head on his arm, watching the last of her bubbles drift into the wind. Isla turned to him. "Can I tell you something stupid?" she asked, voice soft. He looked at her. "When I first met you, I thought you were just another background figure, someone who faded in and out of rooms like noise. I was too busy being important to notice what really mattered." She glanced down. "But you saw everything. You watched people when no one else was watching. You noticed the kid hiding in the corner. You fixed what was broken quietly, without needing credit." She looked back up, eyes shining. "That's the kind of man I want in my daughter's life. And maybe, if I'm lucky, in mine too." Calder was quiet for a long time. Then in a voice that cracked just slightly, he said, "I used to believe my best days were behind me, that I'd had my chance music school marriage ambition and lost it all. I thought maybe if I stayed small, life would stop hurting." He looked toward Aurora, now asleep on the bench, arms wrapped around his coat. "But then she came, and she needed me to be big again, brave again. And somehow, you did too." Isla reached over and touched his hand. Not just a touch, but a quiet declaration. "You don't have to do this alone anymore, Calder." The next morning, Calder walked into Lindbridge Foundation headquarters not as a janitor, but as Director of Community Inclusion. No fanfare, no ribbon cutting, just him, a new desk, and a photo of Aurora taped to his monitor. He didn't care about the title. What mattered was the work. The kids like Aurora, the parents like Isla, the quiet ones in the corners of classrooms who needed someone to see them first. That afternoon, Aurora ran into his new office carrying a hand-drawn sign. Stick figures of him, her, and Isla. Underneath she'd written in her uneven, careful handwriting, "My family." That night, they had dinner at a small diner near the river. No bodyguards, no board meetings, just grilled cheese tomato soup and laughter. At one point, Aurora spilled her milk and Calder instinctively reached for a napkin. Isla stopped him with a smile. "You're off duty, Mr. Hayes." He chuckled. "Habit." She leaned forward, voice low and warm. "Calder." "Yeah, I don't want this to feel like gratitude. I want it to feel like beginning." He looked at her. Really looked. Then whispered, "It does." Outside, under the glow of the street lamp, Aurora fell asleep in the back seat of Isla's car. Calder walked Isla to the driver's side. Just as she was about to open the door, she turned. "Would it be terribly inappropriate if I kissed you?" she asked, half smiling. He didn't answer. He just leaned in and kissed her gently, reverently, like someone who finally understood he was allowed to feel again. For the first time in years, Calder didn't feel like a ghost in his own life. He felt present. He felt seen. He felt home. The old utility room had become something else entirely. A single white wall, once scuffed and stained from years of mop handles leaning too hard against it, now stood pristine, painted smooth by Isla's hands one weekend morning with Aurora watching quietly from the doorway. That same wall, now bathed in soft morning light, was alive with color. Aurora's tiny fingers dipped into a bowl of watercolors, carefully swirling pinks and yellows into the arc of a rising sun. Beside her, Calder held her wrist gently and guided her hand upward in a wide gesture. With a second motion, they painted a small bird wing spread flying above the sun. Aurora beamed silently. Her eyes told more than words ever could. Isla knelt beside them, her tailored slacks forgotten wearing paint-streaked jeans she hadn't touched in a decade. She added a streak of green beneath the sun, grass reaching upward. She didn't sign anything, she didn't speak, she just smiled. Calder turned to her, their eyes met. He signed slowly. "This is what home sounds like." Isla didn't respond with her hands. She responded with her heart. She reached out, cupped his calloused fingers in hers, and leaned her forehead to his. No applause, no audience. Just three people, a wall of paint, and the soundless symphony of belonging. Later that evening, the light in the house was dim and golden, filtered through linen curtains that danced slightly in the breeze. The world outside buzzed, as always, but inside the Lynn household. It was quiet. Not the kind of heavy silence that had once haunted its halls, but a new kind. A chosen kind. The kind that hummed with peace. Calder sat cross-legged on the floor, tying a new pair of laces onto Aurora's sneakers. She watched him intently, copying his movements with her teddy bear. Isla entered with 3 mugs of cocoa, handing them out like communion. Extra marshmallows she signed exaggerated and playful. Calder laughed silently and raised his mug in mock toast. Aurora clinked hers against his. Then she looked up at him, her eyes wide, fingers frozen mid-sign, her lips parted, and, for the first time, sound came. It wasn't perfect. It was soft, breathy, more whisper than word, but it was there, one single word. Daddy. Time stopped. Calder didn't move, didn't blink. His mug tipped slightly in his hand, but he didn't feel it. Isla's cocoa spilled onto the rug, she didn't notice either. He reached toward Aurora, not to hug her, not to cry, but to sign the word back to her letter by letter. She nodded. She'd heard it with her heart, and he had waited years to be called that again. Isla covered her mouth with both hands. Her eyes filled. "She's never said a word," she whispered, almost afraid to speak it into reality. She didn't need to. Calder said, his voice breaking for the first time. "She was always speaking. We just finally learned how to listen." A few weeks later, the once-forgotten utility room had a new name. It was no longer just where cleaning supplies were kept. A freshly carved plaque hung above the door, the language room. Inside, there were no desks, no blackboards, only floor cushions. Wide tables, finger paint signs taped along the walls, and one long string of photos. Calder and Aurora laughing. Calder and Isla painting. Aurora signing family with both of them on either side. Every Tuesday and Thursday, students gathered inside after hours, some with hearing aids, some without. Some shy, some curious. Calder taught them all the same way, not with lectures, but with eyes and hands and trust. Sometimes Isla joined, still wearing her heels, kicking them off to sit cross-legged and practice fingerspelling like a new student. They learned together, not just how to sign, but how to slow down, how to really see someone, how to listen without ears, how to speak without sound. One afternoon, as the sun spilled gold across the floor, Aurora stood beside the painted wall. She had grown inches taller, her confidence blooming like spring. With a new brush, she added a final touch, a pair of open hands cupping the rising sun she'd painted so long ago. Isla walked in and froze at the doorway, Calder beside her. Aurora looked back. She didn't sign. She didn't speak. She just smiled. And somehow that said everything. As the camera pans out, if this were a film, you'd see the family not formed by blood, but by bond, standing together in the quiet. No need for closing narration. Only one line fades into view. Some voices speak loudest, in silence. And maybe that's what life is really about. Not the titles we wear, not the noise we make, but the quiet moments that teach us how to see and how to love in languages beyond words. Now, it's your turn to share. Where are you watching from today? Drop your city or country in the comments. We love seeing how far these stories travel. And if this story touched your heart, even just a little, leave a comment, give it a like, and tell us what part stayed with you the most. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next story. We've got more beautiful journeys coming your way, and you'll want to be here for every single one. From all of us here, thank you for listening, thank you for feeling, and thank you for being part of this little corner of the internet where kindness still echoes. Until next time, stay human, stay hopeful, stay listening.